ever been hangry?
Yeah.
Like really, really hungry in a totally new place.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so picture this. You're in some like bustling market, totally overwhelmed, stomach's growling, and you're trying to order lunch.
Been there.
You point out a picture on the menu, say something that in your head sounds exactly like, I'd like this, please.
Mm-hmm.
But then, instead of that delicious-looking plate of dumplings, what shows up? A heaping pile of, I don't know, fried crickets.
Oh.
Happens all the time. It's incredible how even the simplest sentences can go so hilariously wrong, right? Even when you're sure you nailed it. That's what this whole deep dive thing is about, really.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
Totally. Those everyday phrases we use without thinking, they've got all these hidden layers, secret structures that shape how they land, you know? And today, we're digging into all that.
Absolutely. You're spot on. Most people, they want to feel confident when they speak, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like certain that their message is going to be understood exactly the way they intended it.
Right, exactly.
And I think to do that well, we've got to go a little deeper than just the surface level of the words themselves. It's like sentences. They aren't just, these random strings of words strung together. There's a whole hidden architecture, a framework that really shapes not only what they mean, but also how the other person is going to interpret what you're saying.
Okay, you've officially piqued my curiosity. This hidden architecture thing, tell me more. What's the blueprint look like?
Okay, so think of it this way. Every time you open your mouth to speak, right, you're not just like dumping information on the other person.
It's more than a data dump?
Way more. It's more like you're performing an action. Your words do something.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and in linguistics, we actually call these actions speech acts.
Speech acts.
Take a super simple example. Can you pass the salt? Now, on the surface, that sounds like, a simple question, maybe? Someone's trying to figure out your salt passing abilities.
Right.
But really, it's not about your abilities at all. It's a polite request disguised as a question. Like, hey, I need the salt, please pass it.
Yeah. Oh, you just blew my mind. Seriously, I never thought of it like that before, but it's so true. It's like there's this whole hidden script running beneath every sentence. And speaking of scripts, we've got a ton of great phrases that listeners sent in that they're dying to decode, right? Let's take a look, shall we? How about this one? Excuse me, where is the nearest bus stop? Okay, so on the surface, pretty straightforward, right? But what's the speech act magic happening here behind the scenes?
Okay, so at its core, yeah, you're right. It is a request. Someone needs information. They're asking politely. But, and here's where it gets really interesting, it also reveals a lot about the speaker's assumptions going into it. Think about it. They're assuming, one, that there is a bus stop somewhere nearby.
Which, depending on where you are, could be a big assumption.
Exactly. And two, that the person they're asking you actually knows where it is. And three, that you're willing and able to help them out.
So much packed into such a short question. It's amazing how much we take for granted, even in the simplest exchanges.
Right. And not just what's being said, but how it's said. Even something as basic as tone of voice can completely change the message. That same bus stop question. Imagine it coming from like a frantic, lost-looking tourist versus, say, a local who's just double-checking the route.
Oh, totally different vibes. One's a desperate plea for help. The other's just, casual conversation.
Exactly. And that brings us back to that crucial element we touched on earlier, context.
Yeah.
Context is like the ultimate puppet master of language. Yeah. It's the invisible hand that guides how our words are both delivered and received.
Oh, I like that. It's like the invisible director on a movie set.
Yes, exactly. Let's pull another one of those listener-submitted gems. How about, what do you think about this idea? Now, if your boss drops that on you in a meeting, carries a bit more weight than, say, if you're just brainstorming with a friend over coffee, right?
Oh, night and day. In one scenario, you're expected to have a well-thought-out response, while in the other, it's more of a relaxed, open-ended invitation.
You got it. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. That single sentence, depending on who's saying it and the situation you're both in, it could be a genuine request for your opinion, sure, but it could also be a subtle power move by your boss.
Oh, totally. Testing the waters, seeing where you stand.
Or even it could be a veiled criticism, dressed up in seemingly harmless language.
Ooh, sneaky.
Right. Context really is everything. It's the director that determines whether that line is delivered as a compliment, a challenge, or a total power play. And it's not just who, but also the where.
Yeah.
Like that same "what do you think" line lands very differently in a quiet cafe compared to like a crowded, noisy bus.
Oh my gosh, yes, you're totally right. On the bus, it's almost like background noise, easily ignored, but in a quiet cafe, you're trapped. You have to engage, right?
Exactly. It's like each sentence, each phrase comes with its own built-in subtext, its own hidden script. And those scripts, well, they can change on a dime depending on who the actors are, what roles they're playing, the setting, the mood.
It's like realizing there's this whole secret world operating just below the surface of every conversation.
100%. And to make it even more interesting, we can't forget about cultural context, can we? What might be a totally casual phrase in one culture could be incredibly formal, even taboo, in another.
Which is probably why Google Translate gets things so wrong so often.
Exactly. Language is about so much more than just like swapping out words from one language to the next. It's about understanding those unspoken rules, those cultural nuances that really give the language its true meaning.
Okay, so for our listeners who are just starting to wrap their heads around all of this, how would you suggest they actually start to notice these hidden structures in everyday conversation? Any tips?
You know, it sounds so simple, but honestly, just paying attention, like really tuning into not just what is being said, but the how, the who, the where, all of it.
Active listening, basically.
Exactly that.
You know, this whole conversation has me looking at every exchange, every interaction in a completely different light. It makes those everyday miscommunications, like my dumpling disaster, seem, well, a little less like funny mishaps and more like opportunities.
I love that, because they really are opportunities to learn and grow, you know. Each one is a chance to understand those hidden structures a little bit better.
Okay, before we wrap up, I've got one more phrase that a listener sent in. I'm really curious to get your take on this one, since it seems like one of those phrases that can go either way, depending. I'm not sure, but I'll try my best.
Oh, that's a great one. Because, yeah, you're right. It could totally go either way. On the one hand, you've got that genuine willingness to help. Even if they're not 100% positive they'll succeed.
Right. It's like they're saying, I'm not making any promises, but
I'm with you. I'm going to give it a shot.
Exactly. But then there's that other side of it, right? The side where it's used to maybe subtly manage expectations, you know, like don't get your hopes up or anything.
Right. I'm going to try, but...
Yes. And so much of that comes back to who's saying it, right? Like imagine those words coming from someone you just met 5 minutes ago versus, I don't know, your best friend since childhood. Totally different, right?
Night and day. And that's exactly it. Paying attention to these subtle cues. That's how we become not just more effective communicators, but more insightful listeners too. We start to pick up on those hidden intentions, the emotions beneath the words.
You know what? You're right. It's like we're pulling back the curtain on this whole secret world operating just below the surface of every conversation. Now, for those of you listening, we want to hear from you. Think about a recent conversation where you use that phrase, I'm not sure, but I'll try my best. Who were you talking to? What was the situation? Did you mean it as a genuine promise or a subtle way to, you know, manage expectations?
It's amazing how much we can learn just by reflecting on our own language. Right?
Totally. Okay. And it makes me wonder, as technology keeps changing how we communicate with emojis, GIFs, memes, all that, how might these everyday phrases evolve?
That is such an interesting question.
Will they get more loaded with hidden meanings? Or will we develop entirely new ways of, like, expressing ourselves online?
I don't know the answer, but I'm excited to find out.
Me too. Definitely something to ponder the next time you're agonizing over that perfect text message, right?
Absolutely.
And with that, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the hidden structures of everyday language. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.